Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. You're watching Alaska Weather with us on this 8th of January. Thanks for tuning in tonight. And remember, your local weather information is just a phone call away by using the Alaska Weather Information Line. 1-800-472-0391 is how you access that toll-free call anywhere around the state. If you'd like to find us online, of course, weather.gov/Alaska is your homepage. And you can set that on your mobile device as well. Try the address mobile.weather.gov and then search your location. Use the city or the village name. Works a lot better than a zip code. And then once you get that forecast, save that to your home screen. And once you click it, it'll load up every time just like your own personalized weather app for your location in Alaska. If you can't find what you're looking for, please feel free to email me. I'm happy to serve you any way I possibly can. And I really enjoy helping you find your weather information around Alaska, and whether it's ice thickness information for the River Forecast Center and the Weather Forecast Office in Fairbanks, or perhaps information about the flooding in Kenai. I'm happy to help any way I can. Here's a look at what we find around Southeast. As we look into the future there, we see the potential for high winds developing. It's pretty common in this type of weather situation that we have across the Yukon and the eastern and central interior. When we have big, deep winter cold, it has to go somewhere. And it is starting that process now. With a low pressure system working into the Gulf, we're going to draw a lot of that big, deep cold through the nooks and crannies of the mountains. And of course, in Southeast, one of those crannies and those nooks is the Taku Valley. And as we get into late tomorrow night and into Saturday, it looks like the pressure gradient will set up and the conditions will align just right, that we might get winds up to about 68-mile-an-hour winds, maybe even past 70 around the downtown Juneau and Douglas area there. That could include Eagle Crest. Areas north of downtown might not see quite a strong wind, as you know, in the Taku wind there. It's a fairly localized effect, but when the winds get to be that strong, it certainly could cause some tree limbs to snap and some loose objects to blow around, and travel gets to be a little bit more tricky. So in that case, it's time to prepare now for late Thursday night, and this could last all the way into late Saturday night for those strong winds. So the upper 60-mile-an-hour range to the lower 70-mile-an-hour range, a high wind watch posted for downtown Juneau and Douglas as we get in toward the end of the week and early weekend. So that's what we see right here. Up north around the White Pass area in the Klondike Highway, we've got a wind chill advisory. Wind chills could drop to about 50 to 55 below thanks to wind blowing through there. Even if it's just a little bit of wind, when we're dealing with some of the significant cold, it makes a huge difference. And your exposure to that in about 10 minutes or less could mean some pretty nasty frostbite. So make sure you take extra supplies if you're traveling through the Klondike, just because if you have a problem, you don't want to be stuck out in that kind of cold. Everything south of that is a winter storm watch, and we're keeping close watch on the weather situation here. We could see as much as 4 to 9 inches of snow across some parts of the southern interchannels up through the central and outer coastal areas there. It does not include Sitka right now, but places like Wrangell and Petersburg, all the way down toward Ketchikan, are under that winter storm watch. However, one thing that we just can't show because it would just be too many colors all at once, around Ketchikan and Prince of Wales Island, there's actually a winter weather advisory in effect right now for another 2 to 4 inches of snow. So you're talking about 2 to 4 inches of snow first, and then the potential for another 4 to 9 inches of snow following that the next night. So southern Southeast has a lot of snow potential here just in the next 48 hours. Pretty fun stuff. Get your shovel ready. Here's a look at what we see across the interior. Once again, we're not talking about precipitation in this case. The yellow areas are wind chill advisories, and we're talking about chill factors that could be anywhere from 45 to 55 below. Already the temperature is brutally cold. We're looking at levels around Fort Yukon today that we're sitting at 47 below during the daytime. Pretty significant stuff. The time of the year when Denali's shadow stretches 70 to 80 miles north into the central interior, there's just not a lot to break that up. And when we do start to see a little bit of a pressure gradient here, we're getting wind moving through the area, moving through values that are 45 to 50 below. That makes that pretty tough stuff out there. So wind chill advisories again for the Selawik Valley, Baldwin Peninsula, all the way down through eastern Norton Sound, the lower Yukon and the Yukon Delta. Everyone there, again, mind the weather. Make sure your exposure outside is very limited. Nothing new for Southwest, Kodiak, or the Aleutians at this point. No advisories for you, but it certainly is still cold. Here's a lay of the land there as we see it from the satellite perspective. Nothing doing across the interior. There's just very little going on right now. The big story is low pressure trying to work its way into the Bering. And remember, this high pressure system is stable air. It does not want to move. The low pressure system is on the move. So if we're going to change the weather for a great sizable part of Alaska, we're going to have to get this big deep cold out of the way. The good news is it does look like it is on the move a little bit, and that's part of that process that's going to push wind into parts of Juneau. So as this low pressure system moves north and east, it is going to break off a piece of that here across the western Gulf and slowly drift across towards southeast as we get into the next 24 to 48 hours. That's going to initiate the potential for that wind around Juneau. It's also going to bring wind out through the Copper River Delta. It may bring wind across parts of Palmer and the Matanuska-Susitna Valley. That's the kind of pattern that we're moving to. And if you look back through a lot of these big cold periods in Alaska's weather history, big deep cold like this usually ends in some type of wind event, it seems like, around the Anchorage area, around Juneau, and even in Fairbanks. The deep cold ends pretty abruptly, and all of a sudden we swing over to a much warmer period, at least for a short amount of time. So here's where we are today. Low pressure sitting out across the western chain down to 968 millibars there. It's driving that occlusion out across the eastern chain into the Alaska Peninsula. The pressure gradient's tightening up here. You see those black lines kind of jamming in together a little bit closer. The wind's flowing faster out here. Out across the west, deep high pressure sitting across the central and northern parts of the interior. That's where that big cold is. And right underneath is Fort Yukon at 47 below today. That's the ambient temperature, not the wind chill. Low pressure across the northern Gulf at 1,003 millibars, slowly kind of pushing some light snow into the southern parts of southeast. Again, 2 to 4 inches of snow in the southern parts of the Panhandle is expected at this point. Now, as we get into tonight and tomorrow, we start to see the signs of that pressure gradient around the Taku Valley there in northern parts of southeast, but also across places closer to McCarthy and the eastern interior in the Tanana Valley. All the while, low pressure is building out across the west, watching for some blowing snow around Norton Sound and southwest. As we look out west, low pressure is dropping to 976 millibars. We've got a new low in the Gulf now at 981 by Thursday. And again, that pressure gradient is tightening up across the northern parts of the Gulf Coast and across the interior there in those nooks and crannies. So again, a lot of wind starting to develop here. Some of that also trying to work its way into the interior. We're going to see winds pick up across areas just south of the Brooks Range as we get into Friday and Saturday. That's going to add some turbulence to your weather picture if you're flying. So watch for that here in just a few minutes. Out to the west, we don't get rid of big deep cold unless we have a very strong area of low pressure trying to cut into that. And that's what we start to see as we get into Friday at 9:55. The low pressure system out west is getting stronger by the minute. And we see it's pushing a front across the Alaska Peninsula. High pressure is resisting. It's digging in, rising pressure there at 1,039 millibars now. A lot of fog surrounding this in the ridges that are extending out from that pressure center. But in between, each one of these waves will be capable of producing some pretty significant wind through the nooks and those crannies. So again, the Connect Valley, the Matanuska Valley, the Copper River Delta there, all the way through the Taku Valley. Each one of those places is going to be looking at wind that's trying to rush out and drain away the power of that big, cold, high pressure system across the interior. And this is how those changes begin. Here's a look at the temperatures as we get into Thursday morning there. We're looking at temps 40 to 50 below across the Yukon Flats in the interior. Fairbanks still looking at a stage 2 air quality alert at this point. That's also for North Pole. So be careful out there and mind the rules and regulations as best you can. I know it's tough. As you look out toward Nome, anywhere from 10 to 20 below, 26 below for Utqiagvik. Bristol Bay, not nearly as cold as everywhere else, and then you get out to the west and temperatures go above freezing. Southeast, teens and 20s there. High temperatures in southeast don't seem to budge a whole lot as we get into Thursday. That cold's made it into your neck of the woods. 15 on Cordova, 35 below for Eagle, 42 below for Fort Yukon during the day. Out to the west, Galena, McGrath, and Grayling, all looking at temperatures anywhere from 10 to 30 below. Morning temperatures there on Friday, not a big change for the interior or south central or southeast. As you get into Friday afternoon, temperatures come up a little bit in southern parts of southeast where the snow is moving in.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And on with a look at your aviation weather across the region on Thursday. We'll see IFR across the southern entrances to southeastern Alaska through the Dixon entrance and through some of the southern outer coast. MVFR creeps up a little bit further north past Port Alexander into Sitka and likely through Petersburg, Wrangell, and northward, approaching southern ends, the Lynn Canal at times, probably Thursday morning. Most areas north of that, all the way through the Gulf, should be generally VFR. We are going to see very isolated areas of IFR through probably the Knik Arm, maybe down into the Turnagain Arm and the forelands of the Kenai Peninsula, and then east past Tenita Pass, north of the Alaska Range, fairly widespread marginal conditions, and then northward IFR as we run into some of that very cold air across the Yukon Flats. The Beaufort Seacoast, all the way west of Point Barrow as well, looking at marginal conditions to start your day tomorrow. And then IFR southwest of Port Alexander, crossing over parts of the Alaska Peninsula into areas around Sitkinak and the eastern side of Kodiak Island. Not quite to Kodiak itself, looking at marginal conditions there. Marginal westward, St. Paul and St. George. And then we see IFR wrapping around the north side of that incoming area of low pressure we were just talking about. As we get into Thursday afternoon, that progresses northward towards St. Matthew and the Pribilofs, passes the Pribilofs actually, and then we get back into that wraparound moisture across that low pressure system coming in. IFR is expected there across parts of the western chain. A new wave of IFR developing in the Gulf here that allows some parts of southern southeast to clear up a little bit, looking at VFR for the most part across the region, and lingering marginal conditions across the Copper River Valley, all the way down into parts of Prince William Sound. VFR in the Sound, but just outside, look for marginal conditions stretching all the way out toward the Barren Islands. Looking for marginal conditions, so improving weather and visibility there across parts of the Yukon Flats. Still dealing with marginal conditions across the Beaufort Seacoast. You'll notice that creeps eastward of Point Barrow just a little bit. It sloshes back on Friday morning, as you would expect. Across the west, IFR lingers across the central chain, Adak, Atka, all the way out toward Nikolsky and pushing into St. Paul and St. George for Friday morning. Marginal concerns from Savunga and Gamble all the way down to Makoriak and parts of Bristol Bay, Dillingham, King Salmon, all the way out toward Kodiak. IFR concerns across southern parts of southeast, Ketchikan, Annette, and again, Craig and Klawock looking at IFR likely in the morning. North of that, not too bad. MVFR concerns across the Yukon Flats and the eastern parts of the Tenita, the upper Tanana Valley, I should say, east of Tenita Pass. Friday morning, marginal concerns across the North Slope. IFR pushes into St. Lawrence Island, St. Matthew, Makoriak, all the way down toward our southwestern capes, the Shumagan Islands and Sand Point, and IFR pushes northward just a little bit more across southern parts of southeast. Your pass conditions, and really not a whole lot different than what we were talking about yesterday. Anaktuvik and Edigan Pass, both VFR. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass looking to be VFR. You'll run into some marginal concerns probably earlier in the day in Rainy Pass, with improvement noted later. Similar trends for Windy Pass and for Isabel Pass after a marginal start there. Mentasta Pass, we expect to see marginal concerns throughout the day. Tenita Pass pushes over that way. Again, you're dealing with mainly ice fog in the region too, so watch for that to be low. Portage Pass, mainly IFR in the afternoon. A lot of this is going to be on the Cook Inlet side rather than the Prince William side, so a little bit different than what we're normally dealing with. And Chilkoot and White Pass expected to be VFR, so looking better there. Freezing levels, no big surprise. The surface freezing line hovers right across the southern outer coast of southeast, holds south of Kodiak Island all the way down toward Cold Bay and False Pass. We are seeing a little bit more of that elevated warming pushing north of St. Paul and St. George now. Levels over the Alaska Peninsula, the eastern chain, and the Pribilofs stretching up to about 2,000 to 4,000 feet. Icing potential is generally out across the Gulf and across the Bering right now. Most areas over the mainland are not going to see a significant icing experience off the ground. Above 2,000 feet across southern southeast, above 2,000 but below 8,000 across most of the Gulf, including Kodiak Island, and southwest generally above 4,000 feet, and those trends continue as you head further and further west, generally isolated moderate. That's all due to the jet stream pulling in that cold air. Low pressure sitting south of Kodiak Island, wind speeds on the west of that 110 knots. Southerlies coming into the mainland at 65 knots, and then we have our Arctic cold coming in between 55 and 130 knots. At 9,000 feet, low pressure sitting south of Kodiak there. Southwesterlies coming into southeast around 10 to 15 knots. Northerlies coming in over the Beaufort into the interior 30 to 40, and southerlies over the Bering continue there. That high pressure system anchored at 3,000 feet as well. Strong winds developing across the Yukon Flats, and low pressure helping to make that happen. Watch for outflow winds as we go ahead. And the turbulence there, widespread, considerable, moderate, and this is mainly due to gap outflow winds across southeast, the northern Gulf, Copper River Valley, and anywhere where that cold weather is reaching into low pressure, and also across the Yukon Flats and the west coast. Welcome to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service, and joining us today, two more people to talk about the augmented reality sandbox. It's Alana Valaji. She's a University of Alaska Fairbanks mechanical engineering student, helped design and work on the details to make this new type of sandbox there. Thanks for joining us, Alana. And Courtney Breest, she's the outreach coordinator for AKwx, which is the experimental program to stimulate competitive research. It's a program funded nationally by the National Science Foundation, right?
Yes.
Okay. Alana, tell us about how you changed and adapted this version of the augmented reality sandbox. It's a really cool tool.
So Gina approached us with 3 goals for this new version of the sandbox. They wanted it to be compact in a light system that could travel around the state. They wanted it to be child-oriented, so we designed the sandbox to have 3 different levels.
Okay.
It's pretty cool. You can have younger children, you can have high school kids. I guess I should say high school teenagers.
Sure.
And then we also designed it to be more marketable, user-friendly, so that this could be seen eventually in classrooms all over the place, all over the state.
Okay. And you had a big hand in this, but this was a team approach, right?
Definitely. It was a really good experience for myself, for George Stevens, who we'll see later.
One of our hand models today. Yeah.
For 2 other members who aren't here today, Cody Klingman and Austin Hunt. And it was just a really good learning experience all around.
Very good. And this is something that is part of your learning experience as well, so you get to check a box in your education.
Yeah,
right?
it's a requirement for seniors of mechanical engineering at University of Alaska Fairbanks.
Very good. Very good. Well, it is a wonderfully inquisitive tool, fun to play with, and I hope to get my hands in the sand here in just a little bit. But it's also part of a bigger program, something that we were talking about a moment ago, AKwx, and that's what Courtney is here to tell us more about. What is AKwx, and why do you need a sandbox?
Well, AKwx, as you mentioned, is a national program. We're funded nationally, but we're actually located statewide. We're at UAF, we're at UAA, we're in Southeast at UAS. And she mentioned, you know, taking the sandbox as an educational tool, and that's where I'm an outreach coordinator for the South Central test case.
Okay.
Our focus is on the Kenai watershed, and we are really interested in using these tools like the sandbox to interact with the students down there and get them interested in STEM and also communicate the research findings that we've been having throughout the state.
Okay. And one of those, as George and Eric are kind of changing the contours for us there from UAF to maybe something that resembles a little bit of something more of the Kenai watershed, which is one of your focuses for the study, right? And specifically looking at some of the changes there and how that impacts people and also the salmon.
Yes, it is all of our research is social and environmental.
Okay.
So we have social scientists working hand in hand with our environmental scientists. One of the things we're studying is Upper Russian Lake, and we have a researcher taking sediment cores from that lake. So one of the things we're going to use the sandbox to communicate is how the landscape changed over a long period of time, thousands of years, going from glacier, covered by glacier ice, to being filled with water. And then
that's what they're doing right now.
Exactly. So
live.
So they're
So
moving
cool.
the water around. And then I think they've got some props over there, because we're also going to go a little bit more in depth and explain how the salmon got there.
Okay.
So using
There's
these,
the salmon.
exactly. Oh, I think there's a few more.
Yeah, we like more salmon in Alaska. More salmon.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really taking the findings from our research grant and just trying to connect with the community and translate it in a really hands-on and exciting way, so people can, you know, interact with us as much as possible.
Well, sure. That makes the learning and the science real and quite literally in your face, rather than just some boring black and white paper that you have to read about. This is something that people can understand better because it's visual and they're touching and feeling and seeing these changes, right?
Yeah, and get them engaged. And then outreach is a huge component, and working with the younger students, and actually even, I mean, working with the UAF graduate and engineering students it's a huge part of our grant, and we really enjoy it.
No, it is wonderfully exciting. And so, Alana, you were telling us that this is built to travel.
Right.
And this is built to do more things than version 1. Where can this type of project go in Alaska? And what can it demonstrate?
I mean, we were hoping to eventually get to villages that were harder to reach, that you couldn't necessarily move a whole fixed instrument to, right? You need something that can pack up, fit in your truck bed. I mean, one of the most attractive parts of this project is that this was going to be something that was used past our graduation point. You know, this is going to be something that lives in the state for years.
Right. Right. Well, it looks like you're well on your way with that. So what are, give me another example. What else can this show us? We've talked about the Kenai River watershed. What's the coolest thing that you've played in the sand with? What's your idea?
Well, I definitely enjoy the props, but we also like kind of building up a giant mound, and if you put some water behind it, you can make a little runway, I guess, and you know, demonstrate the effects of the hydrology by just putting up a dam and letting it all pour right down.
Okay.
And so that could, I think you mentioned it earlier, you could even demonstrate the effects of a tsunami.
Right.
Or something along those lines.
So it's not just topography, but it's also hydrology
Yes.
and coastal surge mapping and some of the coastal changes that we're seeing here in Alaska, and seeing what the smaller changes in the sandbox might do to kind of a real effect of a slosh or a push of water up on the coast. Tsunami inundation mapping, or even glacial dam release, as some has been demonstrated before.
Yep.
So wow, that's just an impressive thing. That it seems like the possibilities are nearly endless with this, and probably even more ideas that are popping up in your head too.
Yeah, as we speak.
Very cool. All right. Well, if folks want to get more information about EPSCOR, you guys are online. You're on Facebook, Twitter, and on YouTube. AKwx, right? EPSCOR, Alaska EPSCOR, that is. And again, you guys are funded by the National Science Foundation,
Yes,
so
we are.
more to come from that, and a longer-term study there. Thank you, ladies, for joining us today. Congratulations on your hard work there. This is really fun. And for now, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with this edition of Alaska Weather Facts, and I'm going to go play in the sandbox there. We'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And back with a look at your sea ice update. We continue to see new ice growing as you head down towards St. Matthew, certainly well away from St. Paul and St. George, but fully wrapping around Nunivak Island and into your southwestern Capes, the Kuskokwim Delta, and all around St. Lawrence Island and well into Norton Sound there. This is a fairly significant growth compared to previous years for sure, something we haven't seen for several years, so good news. And generally fairly thick ice here across northern parts of Cook Inlet, according to some of our Cook Inlet pilots there, and thank you for your reports today and in the previous days there. We continue to see some coastal marginal ice there all the way down through the Kenai River Delta there. So important information if you're moving through Cook Inlet. As always, you can get the very latest ice information from our Alaska Sea Ice Program team, weather.gov/Anchorage/ice. As we were talking about earlier in the show, the winds are coming up for Juneau. That's what it looks like right now, and that's what the forecast shows for Thursday in the marine areas of the Lynn Canal. 45 knots, 10-foot seas out of the north, 25 knots for Stevens Passage with 5-foot seas southeasterlies. Not quite as strong in Clarence Strait, but they'll be coming up, and offshore winds also will be blowing. Watch for those localized gap-prone areas there. Those winds will be coming up significantly. By Friday, again, high wind watch posted for the Juneau downtown area and Douglas. And you can see that in the marine areas as well. Gusts to 70, 55 sustained, 14-foot seas there in the Lynn Canal. Gusts to 50 in Stevens Passage, 7-foot seas on the 35-knot wind. Gusts to 40 out of the east across Clarence Strait, a 25-knot sustained wind with 6-foot seas. Westerlies coming ashore south of Sitka at 40 to 45, 17 to 20-foot seas there. Northeasterlies coming out of Yakutat and Cross Sound, 40 to 45 with 12 to 14-foot seas on Friday. Northeasterlies also gusty inside of the Narrows and parts of Prince William Sound. 15 knots sustained, 3-foot seas there. Copper River Delta winds gusting to 40, sustained at 30. Look for 7-foot seas. Out across the Resurrection Bay and the Western Gulf, you're looking at northeasterlies at 30 with easterlies coming into the Barrens at 30 knots, 8-foot seas. Northeasterlies coming down Cook Inlet over the ice again, 30 to 35 with seas coming up sharply, 12 to 16 footers there on Thursday. Friday, that comes down just a little bit, 10 to 20 knot winds, 5 to 6-foot seas. Northwesterlies outside of the Kenai Fjords region, 25 to 30 knots, 9 to 11-foot seas, and northerlies in Prince William Sound and just outside of Hitchenbrook Entrance, looking for 10-foot seas there in the northern Gulf. Thursday in Bristol Bay, northeasterlies over the ice, 30 knots with 4-foot seas as you head west of the pack. Southeasterlies, 20 knots with 5-foot seas. East and northeasterly winds wrapping around low pressure in the western Gulf, looking for 12 to 13-foot seas. Easterlies inside of Shelikof Strait at 30 knots. 12-foot seas expected there. For Friday, that becomes westerly at 15, 3-foot seas expected, with westerlies coming across AKwx and Sitkinak, 20 knots, 11 to 12-foot seas. Southerlies coming into and behind that front that's working its way northward toward the west coast, 35 knots with 9 to 17-foot seas on either side of the Alaska Peninsula. For the Aleutians, a west and southwesterly flow, 30 to 35 knots, 14 to 23-foot seas as you head south of the central chain, looking for 19 to 23 footers, becoming 13 to 14 as you head north of the chain, 15 to 20-foot winds, or seas, I should say, 15 to 20-foot seas in the western chain, becoming 26 to 28 as we head into Friday again. Low pressure deepening sharply out in the western Bering, and southwesterlies coming up 40 to 45 for the entirety of the Aleutian chain, with 20 to 26-foot seas on the Pacific coast and 13 to 18-foot seas on the southern Bering Sea coast. The west coast, mostly we're dealing with ice, so not a whole lot of seas to talk about here. Easterlies 25 to 30. You're looking at southeasterlies, St. Paul and St. George, 25 knots with 9-foot seas. Easterlies for St. Matthew and 16-foot seas there. The 5-foot seas in the Kuskokwim Delta region there outside of the ice. Look for that southeasterly flow to pick up a little bit more. Again, all the front is moving north and east, so that's really going to speed up this flow here for St. Matthew, St. Paul, and St. George. 40 to 45 with 16 to 18-foot seas expected as we get into Friday. For the north slope, winds not as bad here. Westerlies across the Beaufort 10 to 15. North and easterly winds for the Chukchi coast, a little bit stronger though in the vicinity of low pressure out across the western Bering. So 25 to 30 knot winds blowing out of Kotzebue Sound and over the Bering Strait, Gamble and Savunga included. Light winds across the Beaufort Sea coast again on Friday. Stronger easterly offshore winds for the Chukchi coast all over the ice through the Bering Strait as well. 35 knots for your day on Friday. Here's a recap of tonight's weather. A wind chill advisory for the Klondike Highway and White Pass region. You're looking for high wind watch. Wind chill advisory there for the Klondike Highway. High wind watch for the Juneau and Douglas Island area there. That'll be for Thursday night and into Saturday. Winter weather advisories for the southern parts of southeast now, another 2 to 4 inches for you, but most of the central and southern parts of southeast, with the exception of Sitka, under a winter storm watch.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.